We are live.
I hope you're still there.
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. I am just gonna riff for a second while I double check our Facebook page to make sure that we are live the way we should be. So hello, everybody. Hello, Barbara. How are you doing today?
It was a little nerve-wracking.
You know what? That's new technology for you. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. All right. Looks like we are live the way we're supposed to be. And let's get started then. Why don't you and I chat and we will see who joins us.
Good. Anyway, like I said, this will be a permanent link on your archive. So That's super cool.
Yes. So I'm going to start and just say a few words about Pen and Brush, so we get that on file as well. My name is Lisbeth Redfield. I'm the Literary Arts Manager at Pen and Brush. You probably know this because you are on our Facebook page, but we're a publicly funded 501c3. We have a mission to support and promote the work of women and non-binary writers and artists. Normally, we do this from a gallery in Manhattan, but for now, we are exploring ways to do this from our home. So welcome to our first ever remote event. Oh, look, there are folks with us. Thank you for joining us, guys. Sorry about the delay in getting going. Sorry about the delay with my voice and my face. I had this problem when we did the test as well. It's really weird. I'm going to try and not watch myself. So we are glad to have you here. I hope that you will continue to be patient with us. If we run into any other technical issues, we're both a little new to the software and definitely new to actually using Facebook Live.
No, but you know what? I have to say, Elizabeth, this is the name of the game right now.
Yes.
Flexibility, adaptability, sense of humor, not get freaked out if things aren't going the way.
Absolutely. All right, so Barbara, I'm going to introduce you, although I have a feeling probably the folks who are with us know who you are already, but for the record, to be official, Barbara Linn Probst is a writer of both fiction and nonfiction, living on a historic dirt road in New York's Hudson Valley. There we go. Her debut novel, Queen of the Owls, published by She Writes Press and is out today. Congratulations, Barbara. Queen of the Owls is the story of a woman's search for wholeness, framed around the art and life of iconic American painter Georgia O'Keeffe. It will be the May 2020 selection for the Pulpwood Queens, a network of nearly 800 book clubs across the USA. Barbara holds a PhD in clinical social work and spent many years counseling, teaching, and advocating for people with mental and emotional challenges. In her spare time, Barbara is a serious amateur pianist, and her second novel, The Sound of One Hand, will publish in April 2021. But we are here to talk about the first novel, Queen of the Owls. So Barbara, I am going to give you the screen and invite you to say a little bit about the book and read us some of it.
Well, I think Lisbeth described it very well. It's really the search we all have for who am I and how can I embrace the parts of myself I might have denied, neglected, not wanted to own. There's the cover, right? And so it's, I think what I'll do is just plunge in and read you 2 pages from, let's see, The Habit of Touching One's Face. It's a really hard habit to break. 2 pages from about 70 pages in, and it will give you a flavor for who the protagonist is. I think she's a woman who, well, anyway, this scene is, she's taken a Tai Chi class, signed up for Tai Chi as a way to understand something through her body because she's very much in her head. And so after the class, she goes for a walk with this very enigmatic, rather irresistible photographer. And so this is just, it's a small scene. It's not like an emotional turning point, but I felt like it kind of captures the first budding of her question. The buildings gave way to a small playground with an assortment of children's equipment, slides, swings, seesaw, set on foam pads bordered by a cyclone fence. It was deserted, but the gate was ajar. Motion sensors lit up the ground as they approached. "Aha," Richard said, "much better than a coffee shop." He opened the gate, beckoning Elizabeth inside. A playground? Playgrounds were for Daniel and Katie. Feeling foolish, she followed him into the courtyard. The gate banged shut. "So, what'll it be?" He surveyed the possibilities. "The swings?" Elizabeth wrinkled her nose. "I don't think so." "Don't think, then." He caught her fingers in his and pulled her gently toward the swing set. There were 2 canvas slings and a toddler harness, suspended by heavy chains from a metal frame. "Truth or dare? When's the last time you've been on a swing?" "Good grief, decades." "Well then, did he really think she'd hoist her adult body into one of those contraptions?" Elizabeth began to shake her head, insist that she couldn't. Then Mr. Wu's words blazed across her vision. "You try, and you can." She strode to the first swing, grabbed the chains, and sat down. Her legs were too long, knees poking up as she toe-walked backward on the foam pads. When she was a child, there had been dirt under the swings, not foam. She remembered, no, her feet themselves remembered, the particular sensation of digging into the dirt as she stepped back to gain lift, then letting go as she pushed forward, legs outstretched, back arched, face turned to the sky. She pointed her toes, ready to pump, when she felt herself raised up from behind. It was Richard, his hands on the metal chains. He leaned forward and thrust her into the air. She wanted to say, "No, wait," and "not so high," but there was no time. Again, he grabbed the chains, pulled her back, and pushed. The world flew past. Buildings, stars. She returned, and he pushed again, higher this time. And then she was flying, helpless to stop it, all the way to the tip of the air, the place where she would surely vault upside down over the top of the metal frame, though she didn't, but fell back again, only to be lifted up once more and thrust into the whooshing immensity of space. Elizabeth opened her mouth and laughed. It was delicious to surrender just for those few moments. Then she yelled, "Enough, please, my poor stomach is doing flip-flops." Richard took hold of the chains and eased the swing to a stop. Elizabeth let her feet drag on the ground. She was still laughing. "Oh, I don't know how kids do it." They like the flip-flops, the wildness. "I suppose that's it." She stood and dusted off her leggings. "What about you, Elizabeth?" Richard asked. "How do you feel about wildness?" She froze. Sweat began to pool in the hollow of her collarbone. He was trying to seduce her. This was what seduction felt like. She began to tremble, a quiver rising from her soles all the way up the back of her neck. She hoped Richard couldn't see, though she was sure he could. It was only an instant, the merest pause, as if the sky had stopped its wheeling to await her response. And then she tossed her head. "Well, I'm not a fan of anything that makes my stomach lurch." She looked at her watch. "Anyway, it's late. I'd better be going." She almost said going home, but that would draw attention to the fact that she had a home. He'd never asked about that. She wondered what he thought about her life, or if he thought about it at all. Well, why should he? They weren't on some kind of date. It was just a walk after Tai Chi. "You still owe me an Americano, you know." Elizabeth's eyes jumped to his. He was smiling. She stared at him. Every inch of her was alive. I know I won't forget. So, to me, this small scene is really a kind of prelude or encapsulation of the journey she's going to take, and her desire and her resistance, her fear of the unknown.
Yeah, and I really like the, I know we said no spoilers, but I like that you chose to put that particular scene on a playground so her children are very present. I think that was really interesting.
Yes.
So for all you folks who are listening, thank you again. Thank you to the Pen and Brush coworkers who have tuned in to say hi. I'm so glad you could join us as well. Barbara and I are going to chat a little bit, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. Ooh, it's hard to get air quotes on my Karen. Is this weird? I'm fascinated by what it feels like to be the talking person on video. This is like, I don't know, super weird. Speaking of feeling yourself embodied, watch yourself on videos sometime. But we are going to have some time for you guys to ask questions. But folks who are listening, feel free to type in questions if you want to. If we can't answer them during our conversation, we will swing back around to them at the end. But first, Barbara, I wonder if I can ask you to talk a little bit about how you came to write this book in particular, and kind of a short version of your history with Georgia O'Keeffe, why you wanted to write about her. How did you find her? How did you find out about her? I know you've told me a little bit, but I'd love to hear the full version.
Well, those are about 20 questions all smushed into what?
All right. Pick the one you like best.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I've learned as a writer is that your story finds you. I mean, I have never responded to prompts or ideas. It's just, actually, this came out of a void. I really, and I've told this story before, but it's just so perfect that I was trying to work on a different book that I didn't want to let go of, you know, that sunk cost thing. And it was really not, it was forced. And I kind of knew it. I kind of had to face it. And I had nothing. I just had nothing. And I didn't know what I was going to do because I'd signed up for this whole program and all of that stuff. And I think in that place of emptiness, sometimes the right story finds you. And you are the person who needs to tell it. It's your story in some very organic way, but it's not a disguised memoir. I mean, I'm not like the heroine particularly. I never studied art history. I certainly didn't pose nude, as we say, not yet. That's a spoiler alert. But the search for the wholeness, the search for embodiment, to own your beauty as well as your brain. This was a lifelong issue for me. And so I think it took form. The story became embodied, right? The theme became embodied in Elizabeth's story. And the whole relation with O'Keeffe, I don't know, it just sort of came. I'd always loved her work. I didn't know a lot about it, but the more I began to learn about her, it was just wow. And it informed the development of the story. I mean, I had the broad outlines. I knew where I was headed in general, but so many of the particular moments and unexpected aspects came through opening myself to learning about O'Keeffe's life and her work. So it was really an intertwined kind of thing.
All right. Thank you for that. Let's see. I was going to ask another question, but first I'm going to ask you to talk just a little bit about your experience seeing O'Keeffe's Hawaii paintings at the New York Botanical Garden. You told me you had gone to that, and I thought that was so interesting to hear how that tied in with your work on the novel. So if you want to say a few things about that.
It was actually completely wild. I was noodling around about O'Keeffe. I mean, I liked her flower paintings, which I happen to have one on the wall.
Hang on. Oh yeah, I saw those.
Yeah. That's another story. And that's really all I knew about her. But for some reason I got this idea. I must have picked it up somewhere about Hawaii being a place where she went there in the middle of her life. She spent 5 weeks there. And it was a kind of place she had never been. And she was at an impasse. Her marriage was just in the pits. It was falling apart. Her work was at a stalemate. People were telling her she was repeating herself. She was stuck. And then she went to Hawaii. So I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I began to look into it. So I Googled Georgia O'Keeffe, Hawaii. This is me Googling. And what pops up, but this link that for the first time in 80 years, her Hawaii paintings were going to be on view as a group all together, half an hour from my house next month. So like, it was wild. It wasn't like it was 2,000 miles away. It wasn't like I just missed it 6 months ago. It was meant for me.
Right.
So
It
was really a message. It was really a message. And so I went several times. I spoke to the woman who curated it, who was wonderful. And I even had occasion to go to Hawaii, poor me. I was trying to take it off my taxes, but I haven't. Part of what happened was there was an email then like a day later about a writers' conference in Kauai. So I said, okay, I have to go. Yeah. So it was very interesting. It's not quite what you're asking, but
it's okay.
Yeah, whatever. I could talk all night. But when I went to Santa Fe to visit O'Keeffe's home in Ghost Ranch, where she did a lot of her work, there's a particular kind of air in Santa Fe. It's very dry, clean, crisp. The landscape is red, orange, bare.
Barbara, hang on. I don't want to interrupt you, but do you mind if I put up that picture you sent me of you at Ghost Ranch? Would that be okay?
Then I'll get to Hawaii in a minute. Yeah. Okay.
You're describing it, and I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going to set that up real quick. Keep talking.
So, yeah, I'll keep talking. So, when you go to Santa Fe, you'll see in a minute, you actually can look at some of the places that O'Keeffe painted. So, this is actually the real place that she painted, and that's me in a funky hat. Okay, so that was New Mexico. And then when I went to Hawaii, and I felt the Hawaiian air. It's heavy, it's languid, it sits on your body in a very different way. It's just a completely different experience. And I thought, when O'Keeffe was in Hawaii, she felt something in her body that she'd never felt before. And so when you talk about doing research for a novel, you read books, you look at paintings, you talk to experts, but there's something about putting yourself in the places, in the shoes of. So it's kind of how I write. If I'm writing a scene, I sort of have to act it out. Mm-hmm. So I know what the gesture is, what it feels like. It's just, it adds another dimension. So I did a lot of very cool research, and you could put up one of the pictures, which was me an inch away from an O'Keeffe painting worth $44.4 million. The highest price, this is the Jimson weed, the highest price ever fetched for a painting by a female artist ever. And of course, O'Keeffe hated to be called a female artist. There I am, literally like an inch away. The guard just didn't care. Of course, needless to say, this was not in New York. This was a travel exhibit, but it was just, nobody cared. I was right up, put my nose right into it. But anyway, it was fun to go to see her paintings. But I just lost my train of thought. But anyway, I went to see a lot of her work and try to understand who she was. Oh yeah, I was saying that she never thought of herself as a female artist, but only as an artist. She really hated to be limited. At the same time, the dilemma, of course, is that she became known as the embodiment of this female gaze, the female vision, the female way of perceiving. And people described her work as being from the womb or from the genitals or from the female essence and all. And she hated that stuff. she denounced the feminists. I mean, she just wanted to be her own woman.
Can I ask you another question that I had thought up?
Yeah.
That segues into this really well. There's a point in your book, again, no spoilers, I am going to quote it though, where Elizabeth asks her students, as kind of a large discussion question for her seminar, she says, does feminist art depend on the artist's identity, or is it a particular type of product? Can anyone create feminist art, man or woman, if they have the right intention? So as you can guess, this is something we think about a lot at Pen and Brush because we work with art by women, which is or is not feminist art, depending on your artist statement and a lot of other things. I'm curious what your answer is to that question, if you have one, after writing this book and having to spend as much time with O'Keeffe and her thoughts and her writing as it seems like you have.
Well, I'm going to sort of fudge your question because I'm not an artist or an art historian, and O'Keeffe was a vehicle for a very human story of finding who I really am behind all the roles. I mean, Elizabeth is a mother, as you heard. She's a wife, she's a sister, she's a teacher, she's a doctoral student, she's a friend, she's many things. But she feels that she's missing something about who she really is. And the pathway to that is, in her case, well, she's trying to write a dissertation on O'Keeffe with her head. Mm-hmm. So Richard is the catalyst to raise the question of, you're not going to understand anything just through your head. So getting back to the question of how one relates to art, O'Keeffe said she refused to let her paintings be interpreted. She said, make of them what you will. And so I have a lot of questions in the book that are deliberately not answered. They shouldn't be answered. Good questions keep living, keep growing in you so that the book lingered. I mean, I want to have written a book that will continue to unfold for its readers long after they close the last page. So I haven't answered your question.
Okay, that's okay. It's a very hard question to answer. Yeah. I think people are still grappling with it in many circles. Yeah. I was just curious if you had been able to come to any conclusions. And
she's not trying to be a feminist. In fact, her students at one point toward the end, they try to make her into some icon of the all-powerful woman who's, standing up to the patriarchy.
Yeah, I liked that. That's where the students went, and she was like, no, this is not right.
It's the same way that people try to make O'Keeffe into the emblem of them. I mean, there's all these great stories of one of the ones I like to tell is that Gloria Steinem went to visit O'Keeffe with a bouquet of roses, and O'Keeffe would not let her in. So Elizabeth is offered later in the book many narratives to explain her behavior, to give it to make it okay, to make it noble, to make it have some other message. And she refuses all of those narratives because we don't want to live. My life is not a narrative. My life is much more vibrant and complicated and human and messy than just a neat. I mean, I use the word narrative as something defined, right? We all stories are how we make meaning, but not the kind of narrative that defines me as this, but not that.
Yeah, and I loved that theme in your book. I thought that was extremely powerful, and I responded to it a lot. This idea that society offers us, I think especially those of us who are socialized and behave as cis women, there are so many narratives that we can step into that are available to us. And sometimes it's so easy to take those routes. And then you find yourself in a position of, why did I do this? Why did I select this easy path? Oh, was it just that it seemed easy? And I really came away from your book thinking, gosh, that's an interesting thing to think about. And I have found myself wondering these days, like, it's very difficult to kick that narrative and how you live without it. I think that we have to be in conversation with it at all times, but I'm not sure we can totally avoid it.
I love what you said, being in conversation with it. In other words, I'm many things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's good. And it's I don't want to get too philosophical. Actually, let's take a sidebar here.
All right.
I for you to pull up that other photo, me with Black Iris, because this was something very cool, and I'll talk about this. If there ever was, while you pull it up, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, go for it.
If there ever was an O'Keeffe painting that had spoken to me early on, years ago, it was this painting called Black Iris that I found so profound and powerful and deep. And this is like sort of a secret, but it's not on public view. So I got a private viewing. And yes, I deliberately wore clothes that I knew would match the painting.
I love that. I love that you matched this.
I deliberately did it. But when I saw this painting, just me and the painting in the room, nobody else was around. And it was so, again, it was so profound for me because it wasn't static. It kept on speaking to me. And I stayed there, 10, 15 minutes with this. So I think good writing is like that. And, there's this saying about, oh, this book was so great, I couldn't put it down. Well, I think a book that's great also needs to be put down at moments and savored. In other words, this passage, I want to stop reading and live with this passage and let it unfold in me for a few minutes, right? Mm-hmm. It's not, you want a good story. And I think Queen of the Owls is actually a great story. It's got a great plot. But I think there are places in it where the reader, I hope, will stop and be touched, be opened, live with the passage as I lived with that painting for a little while. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah. I hope that folks who want to chime in will chime in. If you, you know what, never mind. I'm going to keep that comment for later. As I ask these questions and as I see the people in the comments saying congratulations or saying how much they're enjoying these things, part of me wants to know what all of you think about answers to these questions, because presumably if you're interested in this book, you've at least grappled with some of the themes, what it means to make art or what it means to be embodied. But I do not want to get too ahead of myself there. I will not do that yet.
I'm deliberately sort of taking a different tack with this conversation. It's not like buy my book. It's just, let's explore together what a good book can do for us, like good art. Mm-hmm. And something that has an enduring impact, right? So I think you and I are kind of exploring in that way. We're not talking about what's the conflict, what's the goal. The book has all that stuff.
Yeah.
But this is something, I don't know, a little deeper. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm looking for in all the books, to be honest. That's what I read for. I have to admit, my notes for this conversation did at one point include a question about like the structure of the 19th century social novel and how we see it change as contemporary society changes, which I'm not going to get into largely because there are spoilers. So don't worry, you're safe. But I hope that someone who taught me English classes in undergrad somewhere is very proud of me, because I just made all their hard work means something.
Yeah. Well, I want to say something else about when you have to write, some of the scenes that were so vital really emerged in the process of writing the book. And I think it is organic like that. You have to live and breathe your character. You have to understand her, and she will tell you what she needs. It's not a pantser versus plotter. This is a writer's which I find completely useless. I think you have to have a vision, but really also be open to something much more intuitive or subconscious. And then you call upon your conscious mind, all of those skills to give it form in the most skillful way you can. The Buddhists call it skillful means. But the heart of it has to come from your heart, not just your brain. So I love writing. It's like the most amazing thing anyone could ever do, except maybe paint, I suppose. But,
do you also paint?
No, I play the piano, which is another story. But
yeah, I don't paint either.
no, it's not my thing.
Yeah. I just never had any skill for it. Yeah. I wonder in the last few minutes if I can ask you to say just a sentence or two about your next book.
Oh, actually the title got changed since I first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm using an old bio. I should have checked that.
Well, I will say what the two books have in common is that art, in this case, in the other book, it's music, and she's a pianist. So is a way to find oneself. The story's very different. Her relationship with her husband is entirely different. She has a teenage son instead of small, blah, blah, blah. And it's also very much around of adoption and family and belonging. So it's a completely different book. Mm-hmm. But what the two books share is what I would call my brand, is the power of art, whether it's painting or music or whatever, to transform, to liberate, to heal, to do all those things that we need as human beings now more than ever, by the way.
Absolutely, now more than ever.
And I have to say something here too, that this whole thing of launching a book at this moment in time, it's very strange because there's this, egoistic sort of talk about yourself thing. But really, we do need stories. We need the power of stories, of art, of music, to give us this kind of possibility that there's more to life than whatever the momentary difficulty or month-long difficulty may be.
Yeah.
And actually, I have this third book that is in note form, which is using glass blowing. And I actually went and took some glass blowing lessons. It is so cool. One that will never get written because I'm so. But like,
I'm gonna pass on two questions we're getting in the comments actually before we get lost in glass blowing, which is a place I'd happily follow you. First, what is the title of the second book now?
Yes. It's been changed to The Sound Between the Notes.
Okay. And is it coming out in 2021 or 2022?
No, it's April 2021.
All right.
I'm actually doing the final edits on it now. So, I mean, it's...
Oh, congratulations.
Done. Yeah. But the titles are hard. Covers are hard,
Absolutely. Yes, both of them.
Genius cover designer. The cover of Queen of the Owls is actually an O'Keeffe painting called White Iris. Julie Metz is a genius. And of course, when she first came up with this cover, I hated it. It was not what I had in mind. And boy, was I wrong.
Neat. Well then, All right. We are at pretty much exactly half an hour with you and I talking, which is what we wanted to do. So is there anything else you want to say, Barbara, or should I
bring it up in the comments? If there are comments and questions, I'll be glad to weave it all in.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I know it takes a little time for your fingers to type. So I'm announcing, please ask your questions. Barbara and I will keep chatting, but I will pass those along as they come in and make sure we get to them. What was I going to say? I was just going to say I saw something funny on Twitter today that made me think about your conversation about what it means to step into a female narrative, that someone had said, curse you, second wave feminism. Suddenly I need to know how to sew and cook, and I never learned to do either. And I just thought it was the funniest thing. And the way that this woman who is an author had sort of both figured out what the problem was and also figured out who to blame for it and pulled in, the reason why she is not necessarily a sewer.
So if there is a question, or you can ask me one.
It actually is a question from someone I invited. So thank you for coming, Catherine. She's asking about books you would recommend for pandemic reading. If you've got anything, is there anything you're reading now, anything that speaks to you?
Well, of course, I would highly recommend Queen of the Owls.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Just kidding. Pandemic specific reading? Or I'm not quite sure what you mean. Or
I think the question is like, what do you read right now when we're all scared and we can't really move anywhere, if our emotions are limited? You know, if you're like me, in a 650-foot square apartment, you share with one other person and an animal, and you just don't have a lot of mobility, and you need to read somewhere. Is there anything you're reading right now that's bringing you comfort?
Well, you know, people have different tastes in reading, and they read for different purposes. So, and I'm kind of, I have to say, I'm kind of selective. I read slowly. I have to really love a book. And so I'm a little bit between books right now because I've been so crazy. So I couldn't begin to tell you, but I would say this, that I am gravitating toward stories that bring out the best in us. I don't want to read anything dark, and I don't necessarily mean escapist, but I was so touched by Queen Elizabeth's speech. I don't know if you saw it. And
I did not actually. I should have. I will.
But she called on us to find the best parts of ourselves right now. So my taste in books and in film really runs to stories, not that the character's not going to struggle and have dark sides and very serious weaknesses, but in the end, one feels that reminded of the nobility and generosity and goodness of the human spirit. So that's really where I go right now.
I have to say, me too. And if any of you folks who are listening are reading anything right now that's really moving you and you would recommend to others, put them in the comments. We can all look them up when we get a chance. Let's see. I have another question from Heather. Did you plan to do a series or standalone, each focused on the arts? A series of standalones, each focused on the arts, or did that happen organically?
Well, each book is a standalone. So the thing with music also kind of evolved. That book evolved over years. Queen of the Owls was really quick. I mean, start to finish, it didn't take me maybe a year, which is not, but the other book evolved over a long time. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about that one. I left it and I went back to it. When I went back, my own study of piano had deepened, and I was ready to write that book. Okay. And I understood the heroine of that one initially was kind of a little too angry and snarky. And I realized that if you play music and you love music, you're not an angry, snarky person. It's impossible. And so I was more ready to complete it. I also found this is like completely off topic, but I was looking at the score of the piece that she's using in that book, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before, which was that Schubert adds an entire measure at the end of silence. And I thought, wow, the composer wrote in an extra measure of silence. So what I'm saying is you keep seeing new things that inform you. So anyway, this is a bizarre answer, but each book should be a standalone. I think that there's a theme in the sense of, I call it my brand, which is my personal interest, but no, each is completely separate.
Yeah. Okay. And then a really good question here. How do your characters in your writing in general deal with the male gaze? So this is from someone who hasn't read the book yet. I think as someone who has read the book, I have a few guesses, but would you just speak to briefly how you've grappled with that, especially given that you're writing about a man making art, a photographer who's like
Right.
very invested in the male gaze. It's a big part of your book.
Yeah, this is a whole thing with that because Elizabeth doesn't feel seen by her husband as a woman. And she yearns to be truly seen, and through being seen, to be known. So when this photographer appears to her, she believes that he sees her. And it's a little ambivalent whether he's seeing her as a man or as a photographer, right? So there's that complexity of what is his gaze. But she yearns not to be defined by the male gaze, but to be, it's something that's been missing for her. And of course, the whole thing with O'Keeffe is very complicated. We still don't really know whether she colluded with Stieglitz in these photos to get attention so that people would then buy her paintings, or whether she offered herself to him and he took advantage of that to sensationalize her. Did he really see her, or did she? Well, here's the thing: is it that someone sees me, or that I reveal myself? If I choose to reveal myself, then I have a kind of power. One of the things I did, now this is the first time that I've ever said this in any interview. A friend of mine had worked as a stripper when she was younger, and I interviewed her for other reason. And she talked to me about how she chose to be, she just needed money. She was in college, it was years and years, 20 years earlier, 30 years ago. And how it was important to her to choose to be seen rather than to be exploited. She felt that she had the power to choose to be revealed. Now, this is very complicated, and I don't mean to be belittling people who are taken advantage of and exploited, please. But I think that it dances on the line about being gazed at as an object or being empowered through revealing oneself. That's really what I'm trying to say.
So it is possible to walk through a society where the aesthetics are largely defined by a male gaze, but subvert that and make that your own in some way, which I think is heartening and wonderful. And that's a theme I'm happy to read about.
Well, it sounds idealistic, and I don't mean to make it simplistic. It's such a complicated.
Yeah, and even that was a fairly vast summary. But
putting on areas that are way beyond what the book talks about in any.
And it's incredibly, the male gaze has filled more than one book for sure.
It's a whole other topic. But suffice it to say that my protagonist has felt deeply unseen, right? Yeah. And her transformation comes about through consciously, intentionally revealing herself and owning it, embracing the very thing that she feared. That's the closest, what I just said, to how this question of revelation or being gazed upon is really conveyed in the book. She understands that she needs to embrace the very thing that terrified her.
Yeah, and I like that it's also, in your book, there's part of the fear is ignorance. I like that what she gets by embracing how she is seen is a deeper knowledge of herself.
Yeah.
I think that was a nuanced and very interesting choice. So I have a question about craft here as well. Just gonna keep moving on. Sharon would like to know, when did you start writing this book? Did you go through phases while you were figuring it out?
Well, I sort of found my way through it. I had a vision of the beginning, and I kind of saw who she was. It's sort of hard to explain because there were several major changes from the first draft to, let's say, the third draft, but they were chiefly in her relationships with her husband and her sister. So those had to deepen a lot. And one of my mentors, Sandra Schofield, used to like scold me. And she said, you know, like, why are you making the husband such a jerk and such a unlikable, you know, he's trying. And why can't Elizabeth try harder with her husband? Why are she and the sister so snippy to each other? Why don't they love each other, but they don't understand each other? Why can't they just wish each other well, even though their paths are so different, right? So it was all in the deepening and the humanizing of her relationships that I had to really expand my own craft. So the bones of the story only take you so far. It's the deepening of the secondary characters and of her relationships to them that I think is where the development of the deepening of craft comes.
That makes sense. I think sometimes in some stories, the plot is the plot, but the phases are, you're kind of excavating down. Your phases are working into your characters rather than, working outward or something. It makes sense to me, having read the book, that might have been your process. And I think all those notes about humanizing the sister and the husband were well taken. I found them both very interesting characters. I feel like there are so many ways to badly write a marriage that perhaps has some challenges. And I think that you took an interesting choice there. And I found Elizabeth's relationship to her husband very interesting to read.
Yeah, I mean, they're not bad people.
No, neither of them are.
One of my favorite lines in the book was, like, I'm going to ruin the whole story. But
well, no, someone actually asked about a favorite passage, so I think this is a great time for
I love every line of now. Well, one of the lines that kind of came to me that speaks to this question of her husband he'll never see her. He'll never be able to give her what she now understands that she needs. But he's not a bad man, and she doesn't hate him, and he doesn't hate her. So one of the lines that came to me when they are deciding to separate, and I ruined the whole book now, but all right. Anyway, and he says, kind of wistfully, I wish we could have done better. And she says, we will, but it will be a different kind of better.
Yeah, that was a lovely moment.
Just came to me as that poignancy, which was so much more powerful for me than just, like he was a schmuck or something. It's the way it is in life, right?
Huh. Yeah, yes. Sorry, I was going to go off on the 19th century novel again, and I'm going to spare y'all.
Not doing that.
So we're nearing 8 o'clock. I want to let everybody go and get back to their sourdough and whatnot. So let's do a little. Are you up for a speed round, or do you want to take a little more time?
I'm up for it now that I'm into it, right? I was like, when we were trying to get the technology work, I typed Elizabeth's note saying disaster.
And it was not a disaster. Look at us. We're having an awesome conversation. So let's see. Quick question. Don't think too hard about this. Regina is asking, what were you reading before you started writing Queen of the Owls? In this idea that your experience of what you need to write your novel will come to you. What were you reading as you started this book?
I don't remember. I honestly don't. Sorry. That was a quick answer because I don't remember. Because I started writing it, whatever it was, 2 years ago or something. So, yeah.
Sure. Who are some of your other favorite artists who happen to also be women?
Well, it's a logical step to Frida Kahlo, of course, who's probably the other female artist who broke boundaries and kind of defined something for herself and struggled with a complicated marriage, right? Mm-hmm. I just learned, by the way, that Kahlo had a correspondence with O'Keeffe, which I never knew about before. you know? And, you know, so how am I drawing such a blank? Because actually one of my favorite artists is Vermeer, who of course is a male from centuries ago, and it's got nothing to do with that. But what I love about Vermeer is that his paintings come to life, right? Oh, one thing I wanted to say about O'Keeffe's paintings that's really fascinating is that, and actually if you want to pull up that, the one from the Iao Valley in Hawaii, because it's a beautiful example of how her paintings make you, it's the green one with the stuff, yeah, they, you have to enter them. You're not an observer looking at a scene. So you see in this painting, you as the viewer are already inside, right? There's no frame. You're somehow right in the middle of this valley, and whether it's the fog or the light or something that is arising from the center, it could be considered to be, again, a very feminine, very sexual image, but perhaps just a beautiful place in nature. So anyway, you're right in the midst of it, and you're not separate. So that's the kind of art that I like, where you're right in it. Again, I didn't answer the question. I'm sorry. Try another one.
That's okay.
I'm incorrigible.
That's okay. The person who asked is a colleague. So what I'm going to do actually is tomorrow I'll actually be talking to her. So if she has any suggestions for you, I will pass those along.
And again, I'm not an artist, but this just came to me and grew on me as the vehicle.
Someone actually, this is an interesting question that I think is connected a little bit. Someone was curious. This is Joan, and I'm going to read this question in its entirety. Joan says, in what way did your love for music enable you to appreciate O'Keeffe's art? Sure. Or to ask this in another way, if you were not a musician, how might your art appreciation be different?
Oh, good grief. Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer it in my own way, which is, but it's actually, it does answer the question. When you're writing, you're dealing with language, with words. And if you're a good writer, every word needs to earn its place on the page. And you take words out, you find a new word instead, etc. So I find that it's essential to have another creative outlet that is not about words. And in fact, what my teacher that I was mentioning, Sandra Schofield, she's an serious amateur painter in her spare time. And I know Barbara O'Neill is as well. And I think there's something about having another form that is sourced from something other than language. So music is like that. I'm sure painting is. The thing with music also that's so incredible is it requires your body, your hands, your arms, your mind. You have to pay attention. You have to have an intention for every measure. You have to know whether it's B or B flat, and your feeling. So it asks for the whole of you. I think, again, a good book, well, you might not need your body for it, but good any kind of art requires more than one part of you. Let's put it this way. So.
And I know this night is about you, but I want to just jump in and tag in on that. I'm an amateur musician as well. I play the cello. I have for a very long time.
Oh, wow.
And as someone who works around visual art all the time without a strong background in it, I feel like both music and visual art give you a capacity for a nonverbal abstract that is very useful when you're toggling between one and the other and you are sort of inherently a verbal person. I felt encountering the art that I work around, which is sometimes it does not always have an obvious narrative or an obvious shape. I found that my studies of music and my attempts to kind of grapple with really abstract jazz were useful when I first started working at Pen and Brush, and I was like, oh my God, I need to know about contemporary art. How do I do this? And the vocabulary for it seemed to me, it felt to be very informed by what I had built up on trying to understand music, which is also sometimes very hard to get your brain around and inherently nonverbal.
Well, I was saying,
they're linked.
In terms of writing, there's another aspect, which is the music of the language. So you really need, at some point later on, not first couple of drafts, to read your book out loud and hear it, hear the language, hear the rhythm, hear your characters. Every character needs to have a different way of speaking. You need to hear it. So it's very interesting. And like I said, some of the scenes that I had to work, I had to actually feel them in my body to know what would be an authentic gesture. So I think writing does actually call upon so many parts of oneself. And I think the other thing that fascinates me is this appreciation for the humanity in different kinds of characters, right? Although one of my friends just absolutely hates Richard. She just, but it's okay. But I don't hate any of the characters. I think that there's always, no one is simple, not even a character in a book.
Yeah. No, that's completely true. So I got one question here floating around, which is, what is your favorite book?
So many. But I think I'll name some authors. There's not one favorite, but first I'll say that I see my dream would be Queen of the Owls to be in the chain that started with actually Kate Chopin's book called The Awakening. I think it was 18 something or other. Mm-hmm. And then I loved, Sue Miller wrote a book called The Good Mother in the 90s. That again is about a woman finding her sensuality, the price she has to pay for that. Then of course you have Eat, Pray, Love, whatever it is. So there's this kind of chain of books about women opening to their fuller selves. So that said, I love I love this book called Idaho. No one's ever heard of it. Emily Ruskovich. It's an amazing book. I love Jenna Blum's books. Hi, Jenna. I love her books. I love anything by Sue Miller, like Ann Tyler. Just so many women. I read upmarket women's fiction pretty much. That's what I like. Books that, unto my friends Jenny Ogden and Ellen Nottbaum, I totally love their books, that are more than just entertainment, that are helping us understand what it means to be human.
Yeah, those are the best books. All right, it is 10 after 8. According to the little counter on my clock here, we've been live for 58 minutes and 23 seconds, guys.
After that big, slow beginning.
It's all right. We're doing great. And I think it might just be about time to wrap up and let everyone get on with their evening, excuse me. So thank you all for joining us. In the description of the stream, right above our faces, should be Barbara's website, where you can read a little bit more about the book. You can buy a copy. From
your indie bookstore, where
yes,
you keep them alive.
I was going to say, with my hat on as a passionate advocate for independent, all things independent and literary, buy from your indies. Barbara's got some links on her website through IndieBound and a couple of other places you can buy. But if you have a local indie that is either still in business or shipping, think of them. A lot of good people are out of work right now from the bookstore community. And thank you for coming. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for your time.
Your patience. Those of you who didn't give up, thank you. And I want to say one thing. I'm super excited to be inaugurating this new aspect of pen and brush, I think it's fantastic because with this new virtual platform and having programs like this archive, it's going to make their work available to people who can't get there in person for one reason or another, whether they have a disability or they have 3 screaming kids that are, clutching at them, or they're out of town. Or I think like that's so amazing. So I am honored to be part of this, maiden voyage for pen and brush.
We are honored to have you, Barbara. We could not have asked for a more enthusiastic partner for this first event in our virtual space. Next time we'll green screen backgrounds, like fancy libraries behind both of us. Make it even funner. But thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone who came, who participated. It means a lot that you wanted to be a part of this. It means a lot we got to talk to you. Gosh, good luck. Take care of yourselves. Someone emailed me the other day and she said, hi, Lisbeth. I wanted to check in on this event that we had planned in May. We're probably going to have to go virtual. And she ended by saying, how are you doing? In this deeply serious way that I hugely appreciated. And I really genuinely hope that we are all doing okay. Because it has been a couple of months. One person says this event in this mode breaks through our isolation. That's Regina. And I think that's a wonderful thing to say. Thank you, Regina, if you're still here. Thank you for the great question as well. Thank you, everybody who said they're excited about the book. Barbara, when you have some time, log into Facebook. The comments remain live as well. So you'll be able to see all of your friends, all of the folks who said congratulations, who waved. There have been those coming in our comment thread while you've been talking. And I don't know if you have that turned on, but look at them later. It's
okay. Thank you.
It's much deserved. Lots of good congratulations there. Okay. So, excuse me, allergies. Thank you. I'm going to turn this broadcast off. Good night. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, done.